What's up, everybody? Welcome back to The Pulse. This is part 2 of our 3-part series on research and advocacy with Dr. Fakhri Shafai, Chief Science Officer at AIDE Canada. In this episode, Dr. Shafai discusses gaps in research and some exciting new developments. If you haven't listened to part 1, check that out and then come back for this second part. Let's get to it. So obviously you work with a lot of other clinicians and researchers. What are some of the research projects that you're really excited about?
I would say the thing I'm most excited about is that we're finally paying attention to adults. If you look at the research of autistic individuals, again, it started off primarily with infants and children. Like, that's the vast majority of the research. And I want to say as late as 2019, they did a study and they looked at all the studies that have been published on autism. And I might be a little bit off on this number, but I want to say less than 3% of the studies were on autistic adults. 3%. So autistic adults are one of the least studied groups in this line of research. Why? Because for a long time, we assumed it was a childhood disorder. Another thing that was a problem in the research, and still is, but it's getting better, is that we assumed it was a male childhood disorder. So females on the autism spectrum have received so little attention in the research. And a lot of researchers, and this drives me bonkers, a lot of researchers say, well, we only want, like, if they have 100 autistic participants that they're looking for their subject number or their number of participants, they say, oh, well, because of the 3-to-1 ratio, we will only accept 25 autistic females and the rest will all be males, because that's the ratio we know. And that otherwise we can't say that our results are true of autistic people because they don't follow the numbers of the diagnostic. They don't follow the numbers of what we know about the diagnosis. I know, it's ridiculous.
Okay.
But this is part of the reason that we have so little female representation in research, and it's part of the reason we have so little adult representation in the research. So I would say the thing I am most excited about are the number of studies that are looking at women and the female phenotype of autism, and also like the entire gender spectrum. People are starting to recognize that it's not just male or female, that there's a lot of people that exist somewhere in between, or it's amazing. So we're finally getting researchers to start looking at things like gender dysphoria and identity, and it's exciting. But that is, I feel like, the biggest gap are adults and gender. Anybody other than male. Anybody other than male has not been studied very much, and anybody other than children up until recently has not been studied very much. I would say the one group that is the least recognized of all of the research are elderly autistic people. So people over the age of 65, autistic seniors, have received so little attention. But it's really exciting because some of the researchers I'm connected with, this is their area. They've decided to devote their research to this group of autistic people. And you're seeing studies come out. And I would say the biggest reason for that, and it's unfortunate that this is the reason, but the biggest reason for that shift is because the funding agencies, so the government agencies that you apply to for grants to fund your research, they said specifically, we want studies on this topic. And it's unfortunate that funding is what is driving scientific interest in this topic, but sometimes that's how it has to happen. Sometimes it's an intrinsic, I want to study this, and sometimes it's oh, I need money to keep my lab going. Oh, here's an area that not many people are focusing on, and they have specific funds for this area. So, of course, you always hope that it's from the intrinsic, I want to know more about this, but that's not always the way it works in the science world, unfortunately.
I mean, it is helpful to think that, there may be some folks that are like, well, actually, here's a gap. Let's make sure that we're covering this. I mean, that's a little heartening to me anyway. I mean, yes, obviously you want there to be the right motivation from the beginning, but if there is that opportunity and it's like, we got this grant, we got to quickly throw some autism research in there. I'm not going to complain about that for a second.
Right. And you're right. A lot of the research has pointed out these gaps. In fact, if you look at what we call meta-analysis or review articles, and really what I mean when I say that is somebody looked at all the studies that have been published on a topic and wrote a paper explaining those studies and what the general trend in those studies is about a particular topic. And if you look at some of those earlier reviews or meta-analysis studies, almost all of them said, we need more research in this. There's a gap here. There's a gap in the literature. We need to focus on this. And it seems that the government agencies that fund research in general are paying attention to those gaps. Now, some of that is not coming from the research itself or the autism research itself. Instead, it's coming from things like census data. So we know that autistic people, unfortunately, with the way things are now, and I hope we're making it change, but we know that autistic people tend to be underemployed. So they have lower employment rates than the typical population. And unfortunately, that also means that if they're underemployed, they're on disability, they're probably not getting enough money to be saving because disability funding is atrocious in Canada, and I'm from the US originally. It's atrocious there too. So all of a sudden you get this group of people who have not been able to save for retirement because they weren't able to work in the first place. And then their parents are passing away and they have nowhere to go. So it's actually coming from some of these societal, oh, shoot, we have a whole group of people here who need support and we don't have anything in place for them. That is part of what's driving the government funding agencies to say, oh, this is like a bigger societal problem. We really need to start focusing on this. So that's also an interesting way that some of these funding agencies make those sorts of decisions on what are going to be the priority studies. We will give priority to a study that's focusing on X. And in this case, the X is older autistic adults entering their senior years. So it's exciting. We're finally focusing on this group. I mean, 30 years too late, but we're finally making it happen. And so it's fun to see that, I've been in this field 20 years now, and it's really great to see the progress we've made on multiple levels. It's also extremely frustrating that we're not further than we are right now, but there has been measurable progress.
That does it for this week's episode of The Pulse. Join us next time when we sit with Dr. Fakhri Shafai and we round out our conversation on getting involved in research as an autistic person, both from the analytical perspective and from the design aspect of research studies. As always, if you have questions or ideas to discuss, or if you'd like to be a guest on the show, send an email to voa@pacificautismfamily.com. We look forward to more of your great questions. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We'll see you next time.